Imagine sitting in this brightly lit Seattle crisis center. It's the early 1970s.
Right.
You were working the suicide hotline, picking up the phone,
Yeah.
trying to, talk desperate people off the absolute ledge of their lives.
Yeah, it's intense work.
Exactly. And the guy sitting in the chair right next to you, I mean, the guy writing a pamphlet on rape prevention for local women, the guy you grab coffee with, he is secretly taking notes on how police track predators.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he can evade them. He is actively hunting the very women you are both supposedly protecting.
It is a profound manipulation of our basic social assumptions.
Totally.
You look at that scenario and realize that our entire concept of safety is, well, it's often built on an illusion. We want to believe that a monster looks like a monster.
Right, we want the jagged, terrifying teeth to be visible.
Exactly.
But sometimes the teeth are hidden behind, like a volunteer badge and a warm, empathetic smile. So welcome to today's Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
If you are joining us today, I know you are someone who wants the unvarnished reality behind the headlines. You want the deep psychological mechanics, not just some surface-level Wikipedia summary.
Because the surface level doesn't really teach us anything useful.
Right. And today we are tailoring our focus entirely to an incredibly dark, historically crucial psychological puzzle. We have this massive stack of forensic reconstructions, timelines, and, criminological analyses to guide us.
The source material we're looking at is just exhaustive.
It really is.
We are looking at the exact environmental, psychological, and geographical architecture of Theodore Robert Bundy. But, and this is key, we are specifically isolating his formative years.
Yeah, from his birth in 1946 right up to the precipice of 1974.
Right.
And let me establish our mission right out of the gate here. We are entirely bypassing the well-known 1974 to 1978 atrocities.
The trial, the escapes, the Florida sorority house that is not our focus today.
No, not at all. The goal today is to answer a singular, I think, much more terrifying question. How is a predator built?
Yeah, the assembly process.
Exactly. We are going to explore the 27-year incubation phase of a serial offender. We're looking at the psychological fragmentation, the social masking, and the early onset criminal experimentation that basically built the machine before the public ever realized it was turned on.
It's a slow burn.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the architecture of this pathology is infinitely more intricate than just, the tired narrative of a man who suddenly snapped.
Well, the idea of someone snapping is, frankly, it's a comforting bedtime story society tells itself.
Yeah, it really is.
A sudden break implies unpredictability, which paradoxically feels safer than the alternative. But the reality found in these forensic files is a slow, agonizingly methodical accumulation of trauma, resentment, and behavioral rehearsals.
So to understand how that accumulation began, we have to examine his ontological foundations.
Yes, we have to go to the Lund home for unwed mothers in Burlington, Vermont, November 24th, 1946.
Wait, let's pause on that term before we get to Vermont. Ontological foundation.
Wait, it's a bit dense.
That is a heavy academic phrase. For someone listening right now while, driving to work or folding laundry, break down what that actually means in the context of a newborn child.
Sure, so ontology is the philosophical study of being. It is the nature of reality.
Okay.
When psychologists talk about an ontological foundation, they're talking about a child's fundamental understanding of who they are, where they come from, and what is real.
Got it. So the baseline.
Exactly. For a healthy child, that foundation is solid. But for the subject of our deep dive, his mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, spent the first 2 months of his life in that Burlington facility agonizing over whether to give him up for adoption.
Because the stigma of illegitimacy in 1946 wasn't just a social faux pas.
No, it was a devastating brand of shame.
Right. And she ultimately takes him back to her family's home in Philadelphia, reportedly because her father, Samuel Cowell, demanded it.
That's what the records show, yeah.
But right from day one, there is this gaping void where his biological father should be. And from what I read in the sources, this isn't just a blank space. It's a space filled with incredibly dark ambiguity.
Yeah, Louise publicly claimed she was seduced by a war veteran named Jack Worthington.
Right, Jack Worthington.
The problem is, researchers, journalists, and private investigators have spent decades searching for this man, and there is zero verifiable evidence that he ever actually existed.
Wow, none.
None. This lack of concrete origin created a lifelong identity confusion. And as you mentioned, the sources point to much darker theories explored by biographers and even family members.
Yeah, we are talking about the theory that he was the product of incest, that his own grandfather, Samuel Cowell, might have been his actual father. Now, we have to be absolutely impartial with the source material here. The documents make it clear that this incest theory has never been definitively proven by DNA or formal admission.
It's crucial to state that. It remains unproven.
But my read on this is that the objective truth almost doesn't matter as much as the ambiguity itself.
How do you mean?
Well, if you grow up sensing this massive, shameful secret hovering over your existence, your mind is going to fill that void with something toxic,
I
right?
would push that even further, actually. It wasn't just a lingering sense of ambiguity. It was an active daily deception forced upon him by his entire family.
Oh, the lie.
Yes, to preserve their social standing in their working-class Roxborough neighborhood, the family constructed what criminologists refer to as the sister-mother lie.
This part's just staggering to me. He was raised to believe that his grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor, were his biological parents.
Correct.
And the woman who actually gave birth to him, Louise, she was presented to him as his older sister. He lived in this reality for years.
Which goes back to that ontological foundation we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
Imagine the psychological tectonic shift that occurs when a child realizes that the people biologically programmed to protect them are actively lying about the most fundamental truth of their existence.
It just destroys the concept of absolute truth.
It does. It completely shatters it.
It reminds me of the movie The Truman Show.
Oh, interesting comparison.
Right. You have a child living in a completely fabricated reality designed to appease an audience, in this case, the judgmental neighbors in 1940s Philadelphia.
Yeah.
If your entire early reality is a staged play to protect social status, doesn't that inherently teach a child that deceit is not only acceptable, but absolutely necessary for survival?
I see the parallel you're drawing with The Truman Show, but I challenge the mechanics of it a bit.
Okay, how so?
Truman Burbank was a passive victim of his fake world. He just wanted to escape it. The subject here didn't just accept the fake world. The forensic profile suggests he internalized the mechanics of the lie.
Oh, I see.
He learned that if you project a convincing enough facade, society will believe whatever you tell them. He realized the world was a stage, and instead of trying to escape the play, he decided to become the director. He
Wow.
learned how to weaponize the mask.
And the man he was watching wear that mask the most was his grandfather, Samuel Cowell.
Yes, the patriarch.
But the source material is incredibly frustrating here because we get two completely contradictory profiles of this guy.
What's fascinating here is how this contradiction perfectly illustrates the difficulty of historical forensic reconstruction. We have a completely fractured narrative.
Yeah, we will.
One side paints the monster grandfather.
Right. The monster narrative describes Samuel as this raging, violent alcoholic, a man who allegedly abused animals, consumed violent, hardcore pornography, and physically terrorized his family.
It's a dark picture.
Very. There are reports in the files that the young boy watched Samuel throw one of his aunts down a flight of stairs.
And he also witnessed his grandmother, Eleanor, who was suffering from profound agoraphobia and depression, undergo traumatic electroshock therapies.
Right, so if we accept this narrative, it's basically a textbook recipe for creating a violent psychopath. You have the normalization of domestic violence, the objectification of women, and the utter chaos of a tyrannical household.
However, we have to look at the entirely divergent testimonies as well.
The other side of the coin.
Exactly. Interviews with Roxborough neighbors, church members, and other extended relatives paint the upstanding citizen narrative.
It's like a different person.
They describe Samuel Cowell as a teetotaling, highly respected horticulturist, a man who loved his garden, doted on his grandson, and sang in the choir.
So how do you process that as a psychological analyst? Are the neighbors just blind, or is the monster narrative a fabrication?
It's the classic forensic dilemma.
I find myself theorizing that maybe Bundy himself, or early biographers looking for a clean Freudian explanation, leaned heavily into the monster grandfather angle.
That's a very strong possibility.
It gives society a convenient excuse, you know? It's a lot easier to say, look at this horrific abuse, of course he turned out to be a killer,
Much easier.
than to admit a chilling alternative that maybe he was just born with a profound, terrifying lack of empathy in a relatively mundane, albeit secretive home.
That is an incredibly important distinction to make. We cannot selectively embrace data just because it fits a comfortable narrative.
Exactly.
It is entirely possible that the retrospective accounts of Samuel Cowell were exaggerated to explain the unexplainable. But regardless of whether Samuel was a secret tyrant or just a strict, eccentric man, the primary psychological damage was done by the structural lie of the household.
The fake reality.
Yes, the secrecy of his parentage provided fertile ground, but it required a catalyst to mutate into something truly dangerous.
And that catalyst arrived in the form of a physical move, which introduced a highly toxic new emotion into his psychological cocktail.
Extreme class resentment.
Yeah. In 1950, Louise finally takes him and leaves Philadelphia, moving all the way across the country to Tacoma, Washington.
They stay briefly with relatives, and then in 1951, Louise attends a church social where she meets Johnny Robert Bundy.
The stepfather.
Right. He is a quiet man working as a cook at an army hospital. They marry, and Johnny formally adopts the boy, giving him the surname that the world would eventually come to know.
Now, you would think this is the moment of stabilization. A two-parent household, a legitimate name, a fresh start in the Pacific Northwest.
You would hope so.
But the sources indicate this adoption completely backfired. He didn't just fail to bond with his new stepfather. He actively despised him. And it wasn't about abuse, it was about status.
The relationship was defined by a profound simmering disdain. He viewed Johnny as intellectually inferior and socially irrelevant.
Just because of his job.
Partially, yes. He hated the fact that his stepfather was a working-class hospital cook. The adoption did not provide an anchor. It provided a target for his burgeoning narcissism. He felt deeply, inherently entitled to wealth and prestige, and he blamed his mother and his new stepfather for denying him his rightful place in the social hierarchy.
I read this incredible detail in the notes that perfectly captures this delusion. He was so obsessed with acquiring a higher social status that he used to fantasize about being adopted by Roy Rogers and Dale Evans.
The famous Western stars, yes.
But this isn't just a kid playing cowboys in the backyard. This was a genuine, desperate fantasy of escapism.
It was a rejection of his reality.
He coveted the belongings, the vacations, the sheer power of the upper class. Think about how material envy operates in a developing brain. If you believe you are a prince who has been wrongly imprisoned in a peasant's house, every single day you wake up in that house feels like a fresh insult.
It creates a permanent state of grievance, and that grievance began to manifest behaviorally during his adolescence in Tacoma.
But he was still masking, right?
Oh, absolutely. On the surface, the sister-mother lesson of leading a dual life was paying off beautifully. He was a Boy Scout. He delivered newspapers. He even became the vice president of the local Methodist Youth Fellowship.
He was building the resume of the perfect all-American teenager, but beneath that veneer, he is actively cultivating a shadow life. The behavioral red flags start dropping, and they are severe.
Very severe.
Let's talk about the shoplifting. He wasn't just stealing candy bars from the corner store. He was becoming an expert at systematically acquiring high-end items he couldn't afford, like expensive ski equipment.
The shoplifting is crucial, not just for the theft itself, but for what it represented a successful circumvention of authority.
Testing the fences.
Exactly. He was stress testing his ability to break the social contract without facing consequences. When he was caught or questioned, he found he could often charm or lie his way out of it.
Reinforcing the delusion.
He was learning that the rules did not apply to him if he was smart enough to navigate the loopholes.
And then the behavior turns violent. The records detail allegations of animal abuse, specifically reports of him swinging neighborhood cats by their tails.
Which brings us to the McDonald Triad, a foundational concept in forensic psychology.
Let's get into that.
The triad posits that three specific childhood behaviors, chronic fire setting, bedwetting past an appropriate age, and animal cruelty, are predictive indicators of violent psychopathology in adulthood.
Right, but there's some debate around that now, isn't there?
There is. While modern criminology debates the absolute predictive power of the triad, the presence of animal cruelty remains a glaring red flag.
Why specifically animals, though? Is it just like target practice?
It is about the exertion of absolute power over a vulnerable, non-consenting living creature.
Control.
Exactly. When a developing psychopath tortures an animal, they are experimenting with the raw mechanics of life and death. They are observing suffering and registering their own emotional response to it, which in his case was likely a profound sense of control and arousal, rather than empathy or guilt.
That desire for control bleeds directly into his other adolescent behaviors. By age 15, he is caught masturbating in school closets, leading classmates to douse him with water in mockery.
Which fuels the resentment.
Yeah. He becomes a highly proficient peeping Tom, stalking his own neighborhood, peering through the windows of unsuspecting women at night. And he is consuming these gory pulp detective magazines that graphically depict sexual violence against women.
He is actively desensitizing himself to the horror of violence and simultaneously intertwining it with his own sexual arousal.
It's a lethal combination.
This voyeurism is not a harmless teenage phase. It is a burgeoning paraphilia. He is learning how to select a target, how to observe without being detected, and how to objectify a human being into a mere prop for his own gratification.
Here's where it gets really interesting and honestly deeply disturbing. Because society has this terrible habit of looking at these teenage behaviors, the shoplifting, the peeping, the closet isolation, and writing them off as a troubled teen going through a rebellious phase.
We constantly sanitize adolescent deviance.
We do. But the source material demands we look at a specific event in August 1961 that shatters that sanitized view. The disappearance of 8-year-old Anne Marie Burr.
This is perhaps the darkest, most contentious shadow hanging over his early timeline.
Let's lay the facts. It's August 31st, 1961, in Tacoma. He is 14 years old. He lives just a few blocks away from the Burr residence. His morning paper route literally covers that exact street.
It was a stormy night with heavy rain. The 8-year-old girl vanishes from her house. Investigators found her bedroom window open.
Just left open.
Right. And outside, a small garden bench had been moved beneath the window to allow someone to reach it and climb inside.
And on that bench, the police found a single, faint footprint in the rain. It was from a kid's sneaker, size 6 or 7, a size that is perfectly consistent with a 14-year-old boy's foot.
I want to be incredibly precise here for the listener. He was not a formal suspect in 1961.
Right, they weren't looking at kids.
The police at the time were looking for an adult transient or a known sex offender. But decades later, while on death row, he engaged in this psychological game with investigators where he would offer third-person confessions.
The hypothetical scenarios.
Yes. He would describe horrific crimes hypothetically, saying things like, if a person were to do this.
And in one of those hypothetical scenarios, he specifically described a 14-year-old boy who is out prowling at night, abducts an 8-year-old girl from her home, carries her to a nearby orchard, and strangles her.
The specificity is chilling.
That geographical detail is what gets me, because the Burr home sat directly adjacent to an active orchard.
It matches perfectly.
But he maintained his innocence in the Burr case right up to his execution in 1989, even when Anne Marie's mother sent him agonizing letters begging for the truth.
The absolute cruelty of withholding that.
So I have to stop and pose a theory here. If we look at the timeline, the animal abuse, the neighborhood stalking, the night prowling, is it possible we completely mischaracterize early red flags? We look at a 14-year-old and assume they're just acting out, but what if those earlier behaviors were actually successful trial runs? What if Anne Marie Burr wasn't an anomaly, but the graduation day for a predator?
That hypothesis forces a radical reframing of juvenile psychopathy.
It's hard to swallow, right?
It is incredibly difficult for the societal conscience to accept that a 14-year-old could orchestrate and execute a stealth home invasion, abduction, and murder, and then return to delivering newspapers the next morning.
But looking at the whole board.
But if you view his prior behaviors not as isolated cries for help, but as a deliberate curriculum of predation learning stealth through burglary, learning emotional detachment through animal cruelty, then the leap to a human victim at 14 becomes horrifically plausible.
It fundamentally changes how we view his adolescence. He wasn't a troubled kid looking for guidance. He was an apex predator practicing in the shallow end of the pool.
That's a terrifying way to put it, but accurate.
But as he grows older, petty theft in Tacoma and lurking in neighborhood bushes isn't enough to satisfy him. He still has that burning, obsessive class resentment. He wants to conquer the elite. To do that, he needs a new stage.
Which initiates his collegiate era from 1965 to 1968.
He heads to college.
He graduates from high school and briefly attends the University of Puget Sound, but he is instantly overwhelmed by a profound sense of social inadequacy.
The class divide rears its head again.
Yes. He is surrounded by affluent students who possess the pedigree, the cars, and the confidence he lacks.
So he transfers to the University of Washington in 1966 to study Chinese. And this is where the curation of the mask goes into overdrive.
The chameleon effect.
Yeah. He knows he can't compete with these kids on old money, so he decides to compete on intellect and political respectability. Classmates from this era describe him as introverted, highly intelligent, and well-dressed. He even gets involved in local Republican politics.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the dual life. During the day, he is the earnest, conservative political science honor student.
The perfect facade.
At night, he is prowling Seattle neighborhoods, committing burglaries, and feeding his voyeuristic compulsions. He is meticulously calculating exactly how much public respectability he needs to project in order to render himself invisible to suspicion.
And then, in the spring of 1967, this carefully constructed mask finds its primary audience. He meets a young woman. The biographical literature usually refers to her by the pseudonym Diane Edwards, or sometimes Stephanie Brooks.
Right.
And she is the living, breathing embodiment of everything he has ever coveted.
She was from a wealthy California family. She was sophisticated, beautiful, and possessed a natural social grace that really highlighted his own deep insecurities.
She had it all.
She represented the trifecta of his desires, class, money, and influence.
Anne Rule, his future biographer, noted that Edwards likely provided him with his first full, mature sexual relationship. He became absolutely devoted to her, almost obsessively so.
He desperately wanted to fit into her world.
He desperately wanted to impress her family in California. But reading through the psychological evaluations of this time, I can't look at this as a romance.
It definitely wasn't.
When a neurotypical person falls in love, there is a mutual exchange of vulnerability, right?
Yes.
With him, it reads like a hostile takeover. It's like he was trying to acquire a high-status asset to plug the gaping hole of his own internal bankruptcy.
I agree entirely with that framing. It wasn't love. It was an acquisition strategy. He valued Diane not for her internal humanity, but for what her presence on his arm signaled to the rest of the world about his own worth.
She was a status symbol.
Precisely. But the relationship was built on a fault line. Diane was a practical, ambitious woman. She was looking for a partner with a clear career trajectory, a strong work ethic, and emotional maturity.
None of which he had.
He possessed none of those things. He lacked direction, his academic performance was wildly inconsistent, and she began to see through the superficial charm.
So, in the summer of 1968, she does the one thing his fragile ego absolutely cannot process. She breaks up with him and returns to California.
The ultimate rejection.
And this single act absolutely detonates his psyche.
Forensic psychologists identify this breakup as a severe, jolting event.
Let's define that, because a jilting event sounds like something from an old Victorian novel.
It does sound a bit antiquated. But in the context of narcissistic psychopathology, a jolting event is not a standard heartbreak.
How is it different?
A healthy individual grieves a breakup and eventually moves on. For a malignant narcissist, rejection is an intolerable injury to their grandiosity. Diane didn't just break his heart. She indicted his entire existence.
Oh, I see. It's a threat to the ego.
In his mind, she wasn't just a woman leaving a man. She was the physical avatar of the upper class, telling him once again that he was nothing but the bastard son of a hospital cook.
That is the fuse right there. Up until this point, his rage was somewhat abstract. He hated his working-class stepfather. He envied wealthy strangers.
It was general.
But when Diane Edwards walks away, all of that generalized, simmering class resentment and misogyny fuses together and locks onto a specific target.
And we see the horrific manifestation of that targeting in his later forensic signature.
The victims.
Yes, it is an undeniable, chilling fact that the vast majority of his future victims shared Diane Edwards' exact physical and demographic profile.
It's eerie.
They were overwhelmingly attractive, upper-middle-class college students. They were intelligent. And almost universally, they had long, dark hair parted straight down the middle.
It's terrifying when you look at the photo arrays of the victims. He wasn't just hunting women. He was hunting a symbol.
A proxy.
Yeah, he was killing Diane Edwards over and over and over again to regain the power she took from him.
The destruction of his planned future with Edwards sent him into a profound geographical and psychological tailspin, ushering in what the source material refers to as the lost year of 1968 to 1969.
This year is the bridge. It is the exact moment you can trace the theoretical sickness bleeding out into the physical world.
The transition from fantasy to reality.
He drops out of the University of Washington. He is untethered. And he decides he needs to figure out exactly why he is so broken. So he travels back east, returning to his birthplace in Burlington, Vermont.
He visits the Lund home for unwed mothers. He demands access to his original birth records.
And he finally sees it. He sees the blank space where a father's name should be. He sees the word illegitimate. He confirms, in black and white ink, the bastard status that his family had spent his entire life trying to hide from him.
You have to analyze the compounding pressure of this timeline.
It's a lot all at once.
He has just suffered the ultimate rejection from the symbol of high society, Diane Edwards. He is reeling from that narcissistic injury. And immediately, within months, he confirms that his own biological origins are rooted in institutional shame and familial deceit.
The ontological foundation crumbles completely.
Whatever fraying threads were still connecting him to the moral expectations of society were completely severed in that moment.
The social contract is null and void. He feels he owes humanity nothing. So he leaves Vermont and drifts down to the Philadelphia area.
Back to where the lie began.
He lives briefly with an aunt in Lafayette Hill, attends a single semester at Temple University in early 1969, and spends time at his maternal grandmother's home in Ocean City, New Jersey. And this geographic cluster brings us to a massively overlooked chapter in his timeline, Memorial Day weekend, 1969.
A chapter that forces a complete reevaluation of when his lethal phase actually began.
May 30th, 1969, the Jersey Shore. Two 19-year-old college students, Susan Davis and Elizabeth Perry, are vacationing in Ocean City.
Just enjoying the holiday.
They are last seen leaving the Summers Point Diner around 6:15 in the morning, heading back toward Pennsylvania. Their blue Chevrolet convertible is found abandoned on the shoulder of the Garden State Parkway. 3 days later, their bodies are discovered hidden in a dense wooded thicket near the highway.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, if we connect this specific crime to the larger established forensic database of his later murders, the consistencies are deeply unnerving.
Let's break down the mechanics of the crime scene because it goes far beyond a simple attack. First, the sheer brutality. Both women were bludgeoned and stabbed. One of the victims was tied to a tree.
The overkill.
The sexual objectification was present. One victim was found nude. The other was missing her underwear. But the detail that stops me in my tracks is the environmental forensic knowledge utilized to hide the bodies.
You are referring to the specific microclimate of the disposal site.
Yes. Christian Barth, who wrote extensively on the Garden State Parkway murders, pointed out that the killer didn't just dump the bodies in the woods. He deliberately placed them in an environment utilizing a specific combination of heat, moisture, and darkness.
It wasn't haphazard.
Not at all. He buried them under piles of damp leaves and vegetation. This wasn't just to hide them from view. It was an active chemical and biological strategy.
To speed up decomposition.
The killer knew that this specific environment would rapidly accelerate decomposition and destroy physical evidence before the police could find them.
Which demonstrates a highly sophisticated understanding of forensic science, biology, and law enforcement limitations.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. He is living within an hour's drive of this location. He's intimately familiar with the geography of Ocean City from visiting his grandmother.
He knew the terrain.
In a later taped interview from prison, he explicitly admitted to being at the Jersey Shore in early summer 1969 and casually mentioned that he had picked up a pair of girls.
It's a veiled confession.
He never formally confessed to Davis and Perry, but he told a psychologist that by 1969, his internal fantasies about grabbing young women to rape and kill were completely formed.
The pieces all fit.
So I want to run a theory by you. A 22-year-old college dropout doesn't just intuitively know the biological metrics of accelerating human decomposition in a momentary crime of passion. Doesn't this level of forensic awareness prove that he had been mentally and perhaps physically rehearsing the mechanics of murder for years?
I wouldn't just call it a theory. I would call it a forensic certainty.
Really?
A certainty.
A crime of sudden, uncontrollable rage is inherently disorganized. The perpetrator leaves behind a chaotic scene. The Garden State Parkway murders represent a highly organized offender.
The premeditation.
The selection of the disposal site requires premeditation. It requires active research. The 1969 murders are the terrifying inflection point where his deeply ingrained deviant fantasies, the peeping, the animal abuse, the violent pornography, finally crossed the threshold into lethal physical aggression against adults.
The incubation period crossing into action.
He wasn't just interested in the act of killing. He was intellectually obsessed with the act of getting away with it. But getting away with it takes an immense toll. Realizing the massive physical, logistical, and legal risks of what he had just unleashed in New Jersey, he knows he needs a much better hiding place.
He needs cover.
He needs a shield. So he retreats. In late 1969, he moves back across the country to Seattle, and he finds two things that will become the ultimate camouflage: a new relationship, and a new field of academic study.
He begins constructing the perfect mask of domesticity. In late 1969, at the Sandpiper Tavern in Seattle, he meets Elizabeth Klopfer.
She is often identified by the pseudonym Elizabeth Kendall in the literature, and she is fundamentally and entirely different from Diane Edwards. They are night and day.
Diane was an upper-class, ambitious, confident woman who challenged him. Elizabeth Klopfer was a recently divorced single mother from Utah.
Looking for a fresh start.
She had a young daughter named Molly. She was navigating a new city. She was profoundly lonely. She struggled with alcohol, and she was emotionally vulnerable.
He wasn't looking for a high-status asset to boost his ego this time. He was looking for an anchor.
Someone to ground him.
He needed someone who would ground him to society, someone who would provide a blindingly normal facade to anyone looking closely at his life.
She was the perfect unwitting alibi. For the next several years, he plays the role of the devoted surrogate father. He takes Elizabeth and her daughter on camping trips. He teaches the little girl how to ski. He attends birthday parties. Klopfer described him in her memoirs as warm and loving.
But I'm reading the timelines, and this wasn't a peaceful domestic life. The mask was constantly slipping. The sources describe this agonizing hot and cold cycle that he subjected her to.
It was a textbook cycle of narcissistic abuse and psychological whiplash.
How did it play out?
He would be the perfect, attentive partner for a month, and then suddenly, without warning or provocation, he would turn cold, cruel, and distant. He would vanish for days or weeks at a time, providing no explanation, leaving her in a state of constant anxiety.
It's just keeping her off balance.
In February 1970, they actually go to the courthouse and obtain a marriage license. It seems like the ultimate commitment.
Right.
And then, a few days later, over a microscopic disagreement about whether her parents could come for a visit, he flies into a terrifying rage and physically tears the marriage license to pieces in front of her.
That is pure psychological terrorism. But she stays with him. Even years later, when she actively starts suspecting his involvement in the local Seattle abductions and actually calls the police tip line, she still stays with him until 1974.
The trauma bond is incredibly strong.
I struggle to understand why. Was she just hopelessly naive, or was there a mechanism of control he was using?
It is crucial not to blame her. She was the victim of highly sophisticated manipulation. A manipulation that he was actively, academically refining at that exact moment.
Oh, because of his degree?
Remember, in 1970, he re-enrolls at the University of Washington.
Yeah.
And his chosen major is incredibly telling: psychology.
And unlike his previous stint studying Chinese, he thrives in this department. He graduates in 1972 with distinction. The faculty absolutely loves him.
They thought he was brilliant.
There's a letter of recommendation in the files from one of his psychology professors, written for his law school applications, that explicitly says his decision to pursue law rather than psychology was our loss and your gain. He completely infiltrated and charmed the academic elite.
But we have to analyze why he chose psychology. He wasn't studying the human mind to heal people.
No.
He wasn't interested in therapeutic interventions or contributing to academic literature. His psychology degree was a hacker's manual. He was studying the source code of human empathy so he could write a virus to bypass it.
He was learning the cheat codes for trust. I think about the psychology of compliance, things like cognitive dissonance or the instinctual deference to authority. Is that what he was pulling from the textbook?
Precisely. The psychology curriculum taught him the predictable, mechanical ways that human beings react to vulnerability.
The levers of manipulation.
This is exactly where he formulated the mechanics of his later daytime abductions. He learned that if you feign a physical injury wearing a fake plaster cast on your arm, struggling to carry books while leaning on crutches, you instantly trigger the neurobiological instinct in women to help a vulnerable person.
Weaponizing their compassion.
He weaponized their own compassion against them. Alternatively, he learned how to project authority, later impersonating police officers to demand unquestioning compliance. His academic credentials gave him this impenetrable college boy persona that completely short-circuited the self-defense instincts of his victims.
Which brings us back to Elizabeth Klopfer in 1972. She becomes pregnant. Because he is heavily focused on presenting himself as a serious, unencumbered law school candidate, they decide she should get an abortion.
A very vulnerable moment for her.
The sources note that during the procedure, he was the picture of the supportive partner, holding her hand, providing comfort. But at that exact same time in 1972, he later admitted that his internal sickness was escalating to a terrifying, unmanageable degree.
He later confessed to Klopfer that during this era, There were nights where he had to physically leave their house and sleep elsewhere because he could feel the power of his sickness building in him, and he was terrified he would hurt her.
And he did try to hurt her, didn't he? We have to talk about the fireplace incident.
Yes, on at least one documented occasion during their relationship, he attempted to murder her in her sleep.
That's just wow.
After she had gone to bed, he deliberately closed the damper on the fireplace, which forced the toxic smoke and carbon monoxide to billow back into the house. He then placed a towel under the crack of the bedroom door to seal the room off.
To trap the smoke.
Klopfer woke up choking on the smoke and managed to escape the room. But it marks a critical, terrifying escalation.
So I have to ask you to analyze the duality here. Providing loving comfort during a vulnerable medical abortion one day, and trying to quietly, methodically gas her in her sleep the next.
The dichotomy is stark.
It feels like he wasn't just losing control, he was experimenting. Was he stress testing his mask on the person closest to him?
I think stress testing is exactly the right framework. He was running a controlled experiment on his own capacity to inflict lethal harm on someone he ostensibly cared for, while simultaneously testing his ability to maintain plausible deniability.
Because if she dies...
If Elizabeth Klopfer had died of carbon monoxide poisoning that night, the police would have found a grieving psychology honors student boyfriend who had tragically failed to properly maintain his fireplace. It would have been ruled a tragic household accident. He was testing the limits of proximity and trust.
His academic success in psychology gave him the tools to manipulate individuals on a one-on-one basis. But he knew that to truly become untouchable, to manipulate the entire system hunting him, he needed to embed himself in the actual halls of power.
The ultimate cover.
And that brings us to 1972 and 1973, the construction of the political and professional cloak.
This era is where the narrative shifts from deeply disturbing to almost unbelievably cynical. In the early 1970s, he begins volunteering at the Seattle Crisis Clinic.
Working the night shift on a suicide hotline.
Yes. And his partner, on many of those grueling overnight shifts, was a woman named Anne Rule.
The future biographer.
A former police officer who would ironically go on to write The Stranger Beside Me, the definitive biographical account of his crimes. She worked side by side with him for countless hours.
And what did she think of him then?
Her initial assessment of him: she thought he was a deeply compassionate, effective, and empathetic counselor. She explicitly went on record stating that he saved lives on those phones.
Think about the listener right now, thinking about their own workplace. If you have a coworker who spends their weekends volunteering at an animal shelter or a crisis clinic, you automatically assign them a moral halo.
You assume they're a good person.
You assume their underlying character matches their public charitable actions. He was actively writing rape prevention pamphlets for women while simultaneously hunting women in the dark. It is a level of hypocrisy that is hard to stomach.
This raises an important question, though. How much of our vetting process for good citizens relies entirely on superficial affiliations rather than underlying character? We assume that institutions of care, hospitals, clinics, charities act as a natural repellent to predators.
But they don't.
In reality, for a highly organized psychopath, those institutions are the perfect camouflage.
But I want to push back on the idea that this was purely a strategic cover for an alibi. Was the crisis clinic just a resume builder?
You think it was more?
Because knowing what we know about his need for power, I have to wonder if the proximity to the police, the proximity to Anne Rule, and especially the proximity to desperate women calling in with raw psychic pain, was that actually part of his paraphilia?
That's a very dark thought.
Was he getting off on being the one holding the phone while someone's life hung in the balance?
Forensic analysis strongly supports your theory, actually. It wasn't just an alibi. It was an emotional feeding ground. He later admitted to investigators that he felt most sensitive to women who had been abandoned, abused, or were in states of extreme distress.
Feeding on their pain.
He derived a profound, intoxicating sense of omnipotence from being the soothing savior on the phone, while secretly knowing he was the architect of terror in the streets. It fed his God complex. He was playing with life and death on both sides of the equation.
And he takes this God complex directly into the political arena. He joins the Republican Party. He works on Governor Dan Evans's re-election campaign, traveling extensively across the state, which conveniently gives him the perfect documented alibi for being in different geographic locations.
The perfect smokescreen.
And then the absolute pinnacle of his infiltration. He becomes the assistant director of the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Committee.
You really have to let the gravity of that title sink in. the assistant director of the Crime Prevention Advisory Committee.
It's literally a bank robber working as the lead vault inspector. The audacity is mind-blowing.
It provided him with direct, unfiltered access to law enforcement strategies. He wasn't just guessing how the police operated. He was sitting in boardrooms, reading their internal reports.
Getting the inside scoop.
He learned exactly how police track predators. He studied their MO analyses, he learned how they utilize geographic profiling, and he learned exactly what kind of physical evidence they were actually capable of processing at that time.
They were handing him the playbook on how they catch people like him.
And he weaponized that playbook to meticulously refine his own front-end abduction process. He learned which jurisdictions to target to avoid centralized task forces.
To slip through the cracks.
He learned what times of day minimized witness detection. He learned that taking victims from one county and disposing of them in another created jurisdictional chaos for the investigators. He was actively stress testing his future crimes against the state's best defenses before he even committed them.
So by 1973, the shield is impenetrable. He has the governor writing him letters of recommendation. He has the psychology degree. He has the suicide hotline volunteer badge. He understands the police playbook.
The ultimate cover.
But before he can fully unleash the dark passenger he's been incubating for 27 years, there is one piece of unfinished business, one psychological ghost he absolutely has to vanquish.
He has to return to California. He has to confront Diane Edwards.
The summer of 1973, he is still secretly living with and dating Elizabeth Klupfer in Seattle, but he flies down to California and reestablishes contact with Diane.
And he's a new man.
And the man who shows up is not the aimless, insecure college student she dumped 5 years earlier. He presents himself as the finished product, an ambitious, successful, politically connected law student on the fast track to power. He is the exact manifestation of the man she always demanded he be.
He even takes her back east to meet his mother's family in Pennsylvania. And he orchestrates a massive deception, completely misrepresenting their working-class social standing to make them appear as high society, wealthy elites.
The mask is fully functional.
He is running an absolute masterclass in social engineering on her.
And the terrifying part is, it works perfectly. By Christmas of 1973, they are engaged to be married.
But we must be clear, this was not a romantic reconciliation. This is the ultimate example of what we discussed earlier, narcissistic repayment.
Settling the score.
The entire elaborate cross-country charade wasn't about love. It was about power and vengeance. It was a multi-year project to prove to himself that he could conquer the single greatest source of his humiliation.
Because the moment he achieves the victory, the exact moment he gets the ring on her finger and secures total psychological control over her, he ghosts her.
Just vanishes.
In early 1974, he abruptly cuts off all contact, refuses to answer her calls, ignores her letters. He just vanishes from her life entirely, having broken her heart just as she broke his.
He dismantled the woman who had dismantled him. And in achieving that vengeance, he removed the final internal barrier. The psychological dam was completely obliterated.
The lie is off the cage.
He had proven his superiority over the class system that rejected him. There was nothing left to hold his violence in check.
But the timelines reveal that even before the dam fully broke in 1974, the water was already seeping through. The incubation phase was already transitioning into the active phase. He was already hunting.
Yes, the historical record points to a series of fragmented, unsolved disappearances in the Pacific Northwest in 1973 that criminologists now attribute to his early escalation.
The Oregon cases.
On June 29, 1973, 17-year-old Rita Lorraine Jolly disappears while walking in Westland, Oregon. On August 20th, 1973, 24-year-old Vicki Lynn Haller vanishes from Eugene, Oregon. And on November 5th, 1973, 23-year-old Suzanne Ray Justice goes missing in Portland.
And his political job had him frequently traveling that exact Seattle to Oregon corridor during this time. Plus, we have the harrowing interview broadcast on Curio 7.
The January 1972 abduction attempt. A woman came forward and described being picked up by a charming man in a Volkswagen Beetle.
The infamous VW.
Once inside, she realized, to her absolute terror, that the passenger door handle had been deliberately removed from the inside. She was trapped. She managed to escape by rolling down the window and pulling the outside handle, but her description provided the ultimate proof.
The rehearsal phase was over.
The methods, the psychology, the trap, the modified vehicle, it was all fully operational years before the killing spree officially began.
The incubation is complete. He has the mask of normalcy. He has the psychology degree to manipulate his victim's empathy. He has the political and legal knowledge to manipulate the police. He has the modified Volkswagen to trap them. And he has vanquished his ultimate psychological ghost, Diane Edwards.
It's all in place.
Society looks at 1974 as the tragic beginning of a monster's rampage. But 1974 was merely the year the public finally noticed a machine that had taken 27 painstaking years to build.
The forensic reconstruction we have traced today reveals a deeply complex architecture. The pathology was rooted in the malignant deception of his early life in Philadelphia. It was fueled by the intense, blistering class resentment of his adolescence in Tacoma,
The layers of the mask.
and was perfected, sharpened, and shielded through the academic and political camouflage he built in Seattle. His ability to compartmentalize his violent paraphilia from his high-achieving public life was not a stroke of luck. It was a highly sophisticated survival strategy.
An adaptation.
By the dawn of 1974, he had achieved a state of unmitigated narcissistic aloneness. He needed no one, he valued no one, and he viewed every human being simply as a resource to be consumed.
I want to break down that phrase, unmitigated narcissistic aloneness, for the listener. It basically means he reached a point where the rest of humanity ceased to exist as independent people with feelings. Everyone else was just an extra in a movie where he was the only star, the director, and the god.
A terrifying state of mind.
And that brings us back to you, listening to this right now. Why does spending an hour diving into this 27-year incubation process matter for your life today? It matters because it shatters the dangerous myth of the obvious monster.
The monsters don't look like monsters.
We want to believe that predators look like predators, that they skulk in dark alleys, that they are socially inept outliers who can't hold a job. But this deep dive teaches us that we have to look past the college boy persona. We have to look past the impressive resumes, the volunteer badges, the political connections, and the charming smiles.
It's a hard truth.
It is a terrifying, necessary reminder that predators often hide in the very institutions designed to protect us. The suicide hotlines, the crime prevention committees, the psychology departments.
It forces us to demand critical thinking rather than relying on cognitive biases when evaluating human character. We cannot allow a title or a tailored suit to bypass our instinctual hazard detection.
Exactly. And I want to leave you with a chilling thought to mull over on your own as you go about your day. This entire mask of normalcy, the lies about his background, the double life, the undetected geographic movements, the ability to disappear across state lines, it was all built in an analog world.
A pre-digital landscape.
A world of paper records, payphones, and disjointed police jurisdictions. If someone with this exact psychological blueprint, this exact level of intelligence and charm were born today, in an era of digital footprints, ubiquitous Ring cameras, facial recognition, and permanent internet search histories, could they still successfully incubate a predatory persona for 27 years in plain sight?
That is the big question.
Would they adapt and use the digital landscape as a new form of camouflage? Or does the modern surveillance age make this kind of slow-burn, systemic social deception impossible?
That remains the ultimate unresolved question for modern criminology and for society at large.
It really is. So the next time you look at a situation, whether it's a new coworker, a politician, or a charismatic leader, remember that the X-ray rarely tells the whole story. Sometimes the most dangerous fractures are the ones hidden behind a perfect resume and a warm, empathetic smile. The muddy waters are where the real truth lies. Thank you so much for joining us on this intense journey into the archives. We'll be back with another fascinating exploration of our sources next time on The Deep Dive.